This is Mark Bell from supertraining.tv, Super Training Gym, the strongest gym in the West, answering more questions for the Power Project, making the world a better place to lift. Got a question from Anthony Longo, who sent me the longest email in the history of the world. Please don't forget that I do not know how to read. Keep that in mind when you send me an email. It'll take me 4 hours to read 4 sentences. He's got a question about a powerlifting style squat versus an Olympic style squat. There is a powerlifting squat, it does exist, but an Olympic style squat, there's really no such thing, because there's no squatting in the Olympics, and Olympic lifters do not get judged on their squats in a contest. They put stuff over their heads for some reason. But anyway, to answer the question, I know what you're talking about. An Olympic style squat, the guy's going to go well below parallel, sometimes 4 or 5 inches below parallel. They're going to kind of dive bomb it. Feet are going to be close together. Knees are going to be pointed out. Knees are going to be shoved out past the feet, and the feet are going to be ducked out a little bit for most of the squats I've seen them do. And powerlifting squat's going to have a much wider stance. The guy's going to force their knees out, try to get their knees out to where their feet are or where their ankles are. And they're going to keep a little bit more of an upright posture. They're not going to squat nearly as low. One thing you have to keep in mind, you're referring to raw squats without knee wraps, and then you start talking about a powerlifting style squat. You got to be careful of what you're blending together. If you're talking about a geared powerlifting squat, it is unrelated to a raw squat. For most people, some people can perfect it, and some people can nail it down and do the same thing, pretty much both ways. But for a lot of people, the gear protects your hips, protects your groin, and allows you to squat with a much wider stance. So when you're comparing these two things, or you're watching stuff, you're trying to research it online, and you're looking at what these guys are doing, you're trying to figure it out for yourself, make sure you're comparing raw to raw and geared to geared, and that way you won't have as much confusion going on. Oh, that was a pretty good burp right there. I didn't even know what that was. I didn't even eat anything yet today. That's disgusting. So he kind of goes on to say, he's talking about the forward knee travel and the Olympic style squat. One more thing about that would be, again, that's, you're probably talking about gear versus non-geared. I would say that if you're a raw squatter, you got to just squat. You just squat down. Or if you're in minimal gear, if you're in single ply, you just squat down. And if you're required to go super deep, either for a training effect or for a contest, then you'll have there'll be no way of not having your knee travel forward quite a bit the further and further that you go down. The knee will have to travel forward in order to keep a good center of gravity with where the barbell is and where your hips are. So try, make sure you're doing that. Make sure you're comparing gear to gear and raw to raw. That'll help answer a lot of this mumbo jumbo that you sent me here. But one thing you also want to keep in mind is that you want to try to keep your kneecap as high as possible throughout the squat. You don't want your knee to travel forward a lot, because it's going to travel forward and downward at some point, and you don't want that to happen, because that's not going to allow your hips to get any lower. You want a lot of movement from your hips. You want your hips to continue to move downward, and you want your knee to stay where it is, stay stationary. You want your lower leg almost as if it's in sand, whether you're doing an Olympic style squat or whether you're doing a powerlifting style squat. Now the lower leg's going to be able to travel forward a little bit in either squat, but for the most part you want to have that kind of locked in. You're just basically moving your hips and your quad, I guess you'd say, and you're trying to, in either form, you're going to try to force your knees out real hard. One thing that I would advise against is dive bombing. Dive bombing can be a decent training tool for periods of time, and it can also be utilized in a competition to squat the most weight as possible. But in training, I'd make your training harder than the contest itself, and I would try to avoid bouncing off your own body, rebounding off your own body. Some guys do it so much that they just barely catch the weight at the top, and they kind of coast through the lift. If you watch people bench press, you see this a lot in a bench press. I call it a prison bench, Or the guys will take the weight and they'll drop it down. They'll make that noise I just made. They'll drop it down and then they'll just kind of catch it up here at the top and ride it out. And it's like, that's not really a bench press. That's some sort of weird shove move that you're doing. And it's going to end up with leading to bullshit results that won't mean anything. Now in the bench press, you don't see it as much because in the bench press, they make you pause at the bottom. In a squat, there's really no requirement other than just getting down to a certain depth. So hopefully that helps clear up some of your questions, and that's it from supertraining.tv.